I messed up tonight. I lost another fight. I still mess up, but I'll just start again. I keep falling down. I keep on hitting the ground. I always get enough. See what's next. Birds don't just fly. They fall down and get up. Nobody learns without getting it wrong. I won't give up, no I won't give in till I reach the end and then I'll start again. No I won't leave, I wanna try everything, I wanna try even though I could fail.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome back to Zootopia Minute, the one and only minute-by-minute podcast where we review, analyze, and scrutinize everybody's favorite hit Disney film of 2016, Zootopia. That is right, we are back once again, and this week we are bringing you minute 48. That's right, this is our 48th minute, so if you are following along with us, that is going to be from timestamp 4800 to 4859, and this minute begins as we rejoin Nick and Judy. They've been brought into the office of Mr. Big, and our minute begins as Judy, commenting on the very large polar bear, which is just walking into the room, says, "That's gotta be him," in reference to Mr. Big. That's gotta be Mr. Big. Nick says, "No, stop talking, stop talking." It is revealed that Mr. Big actually is a small little mouse being carried by that large polar bear, and they proceed to have a rather intimidating conversation here between Nick and Mr. Big, and the minute then ends on the line, "You disrespected my grandmama, who I buried," and it ends there, mid-sentence. So we're finally back to a mid-sentence cutoff. Oh well, that's alright, no worries. Well, we're gonna get started here, so as always, my name is Simul, and I am joined by my wonderful co-host,
Choco, and I am back from my con, Texas Furry Fiesta, very, very fun con, and the day we're recording this is a Chinese New Year. It is the year of the doggo, so ooh, an animal reference.
Woo! Awesome.
I guess every Chinese New
I
Year
was just gonna
is
say
an animal. So
Wow, the Chinese year this year happened to be an animal. How
it
lucky for
happened to be an
us.
animal. What a coincidence, and we're recording this on an animal-themed podcast.
Yeah. Do you know what year? I suppose you must. You know what year you were born in?
Yeah, the year of the horse was 1990, and then 2012.
Mine was the year of the rat, I believe. 1995. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and that actually the year of the rat and the year of the horse are the polar opposites of the calendar. The year of the rat is actually the start of the lunar cycle, and the horse is the mid one. And I remember because my mom is also the year of the rat, and apparently based on Chinese superstitions with the zodiac symbolism, a rat and a horse cannot get along with each other. So if you're a horse or a rat, you're not supposed to marry another horse or rat.
Yeah. So unfortunately, that means this is the last episode of the podcast because we're supposed to hate each other now.
Unfortunately,
Thanks for
we can't
sticking
be
with
dating.
us, guys.
Yeah. That's a shame. No more ships for us. Anyways,
Oh,
we'll talk a little bit about that and the fun time I
joke
had at or the interesting time I had at Texas Furry Fiesta afterwards. Right. But speaking of the Year of the Rat, even though it's not the Year of the Rat, we have the little shrew here, who is kind of
Is that what he is? A shrew?
I think he's a shrew. The shrews have a very, very specific snout.
Yeah, that long pointy snout. That's like, it's almost like an elephant trunk, but like short.
Yeah. And he has some very, very big bushy eyebrows. And this is actually a reference to Marlon Brando's character from The Godfather, the famous Martin Scorsese film.
So we were talking before we started recording this podcast, and unfortunately neither of us have actually seen The Godfather, so it's kind of hard for us to point out the specific references being made here, but I think everyone sort of recognizes that trope of that kind of character, you know, the big Italian mobster boss
which
guy.
Was started by, Godfather, and then The Goodfellas, which we actually confused, because I was thinking The Godfather Minute, so shout out to the other Minute by Minute podcast. The Godfather Minute I thought was actually done by the host of iFanboy, Josh Flanagan, Ron Richard, and Connor Kilpatrick. But they actually do the Goodfellas Minute, so another Italian gangster style film. And actually, the Goodfellas Minute was the second or third Movies by Minute podcast that was started.
Nice.
So I was actually thinking, this was actually a good opportunity to ask the host of the Godfather Minute to. We were thinking about this like minutes before recording to be on this episode. episode. And I was like, wait, but who are the hosts of the Godfather's Minute if the guys I was thinking of actually do the Goodfellas Minute? And I realized one of the hosts of the Godfather Minute is Alex Robinson, one of the guys who started this trend. He's the co-host of the Star Wars Minute, which is the show that we based ourselves on. So yeah, we're actually planning to get the Star Wars Minute guys on for our 50th episode, but the fact that our 50th episode falls around this Godfather's reference, I think it's also a good time to have him on since co-host of the Godfather Minute. Yeah, so that will be interesting to discuss since we are clearly clueless about classic cinema in this case. But one thing I do want to know is when I was watching early reviews of Zootopia when it first came out all the way back almost 2 years ago in 2016.
That's crazy. Think about
almost every single YouTuber over the age of or movie reviewer over the age of I think 30, the one thing they were like clamoring on about was how funny and hilarious the Godfather's reference were in this specific minute. So
it was something when watching in the theater, it got a lot of the parents laughing. You know,
Yeah.
the older generations got this reference a bit more so than the younger ones. For
I think
sure.
this is obviously a reference for those who watch this. Obviously for the younger generation, aside from those who probably like looking at classic cinema, I don't know if we'll get the reference. Maybe we'll get the references through, oh, that was just like the Godfather reference on The Simpsons or South Park. Who knows?
See, yeah, that's what it is. I only even know it's a Godfather reference because I've seen other Godfather references which have been labeled as Godfather references. It's kind of like how every William Shatner impression is just an impression of someone else doing a William Shatner impression. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it just sort of becomes exaggerated and builds upon itself in the most incredible way.
I think there's actually a trope on TV tropes that's actually called the trope is called Steinfeld isn't funny because people always say Seinfeld is a funny show, and when the people watch it they're like, oh, but that joke was in this and this joke is in that, and so they call the trope Seinfeld isn't funny because almost every joke that is in Seinfeld has actually been referenced in another work, so people only know that work through the parodies and references.
Yeah, I'm so glad there's labels and names for these types of phenomena, because it's like a thing I know exists in my head, but I never know what to call it. That's really cool. Well, before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, we might as well sort of go through what's being talked about in our dialogue in this minute here. So as we were saying, this minute begins, Judy and Nick had been brought into this office because they were caught snooping around in that limousine in Tundra Town. So they've been brought to this sort of spooky mansion to see Mr. Big, and Nick knows Mr. Big. Judy does not. So Judy has been wondering, like, okay, well, who is it? Is it this polar bear? Is it this polar bear? When this huge polar bear comes in, who, actually, according to the transcript, the huge polar bear's name is Koslov, something like that.
All right.
When he comes in, she's like, oh man, that's gotta be him. Nick responds, stop talking, stop talking, stop talking. And we see Koslov sit down at that desk, puts his giant hands down on the top of the surface there, takes his hands apart, and we see that he's been carrying this tiny shrew character around. We just see the back of a big chair. The chair spins around.
And big chair.
Relative to the mouse, I don't know, or the shrew, whatever it is. But that chair swivels around, revealing the actual Mr. Big, who is this mouse or shrew or whatever.
Dun, dun, dun. He's a shrew. Get it right.
Oh, you know what? It says that in the transcript, too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely a shrew. Judy sort of responds with a, huh. Like, wasn't expecting that kind of thing. And we immediately learn Nick is familiar with Mr. Big, and they kind of begin their conversation. Nick says, listen, Mr. Big, this is a simple And Mr. Big holds out his hand. He's sort of got a big ring on one finger with a big
small
gem.
ring. Come on,
okay,
get it right.
Look, when I say that, you know what I mean. Relative to the mouse. Like if this mouse, shrew, if the shrew was a regular-sized creature, it would be like a giant rock on that ring, basically. But holds out his hand with a sort of a little sigh, which I guess is part of the Godfather's reference. And Nick stretches out to kiss the ring. And to me, the funniest thing is Nick going to kiss the ring, his lips have to come so far forward because it's so tiny, and he has to be incredibly precise with how he's actually kissing this ring.
And actually, based on the behind the scenes making of the movie and concept art book, I'll probably save the details for a future minute, but they actually had some people act out a lot of these scenes to see how to animate a larger character interacting with smaller
Did
character.
they do motion capture, or was it just sort of...
They just kind of videotaped and watched.
Just to block it out.
The most famous one is John Lasseter. He came in and they were doing a scene, spoilers for a future minute, where Nick eats a tiny cake. And they actually had Lasseter hold up a tiny quarter with a tiny cake on it and use a tiny fork to eat. And they actually use that as reference for animating Nick in a future minute.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's interesting. And actually tying it back to the, I guess, the furry community, which is something that, again, we're not part of the furry community, but we're slowly becoming involved, I guess, because of this minute, like learning more facets of it. There's a subcategory of the furry community that has deals with macro and micro.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it's like macro basically refers to, I guess, size differences, specifically having a small character in the paws of a larger character, and that's the only thing I was thinking of when the polar bear kind of sat Mr. Biggs down. Because think about it from Mr. Biggs' position. If you're a really, really apparently powerful, rich mob boss, wouldn't being held in sweaty palms be not the most desirable, uncouth thing to kind of be carried around in?
I guess, I don't know, for whatever reason he prefers that. But I mean, that brings up a good question too of, obviously Mr. Big, compared to most of the other animals that live in Zootopia, isn't very physically powerful, right? He's very small. Obviously this polar bear is massive, and yet the polar bear is subordinate to him, evidently. So I'm wondering what sort of power this guy must have. Political power? He must be have a lot of money, for one thing. So I bet it's money. I bet that's the thing keeping, because I mean, what would keep those polar bears from just killing him, honestly, you know? There must be something keeping them from doing that. He must have some sort of crazy political or financial sway over this community.
So actually that kind of reminds me of I guess connecting back to the animal things. Have you read the Animorph series?
No, I haven't. I know we've talked about Animorphs before. We talked about Vegemorphs, remember? Vegisonas. That's a throwback. But no, I've never read them.
I don't think I've read this specific book, but I've read a lot of Animorph books, and I kind of know the synopsis of one of the books.
I'm an Animorphs expert, man. I'm like the biggest Animorphs fan out there.
Oh, I was actually, when I heard Universal was actually picked it up for a movie adaptation, I was so excited, but apparently they canceled it. But so in one of the books, basically a self-insert character for the reader named David becomes an Animorphs around book 20, and he joins as like the new member of the Animorphs, so it's exciting. Oh, it's the first time we had a new member since the beginning of the series, and it turns out he's actually a really, really evil, sadistic D-bag, because he thinks it's okay to kill other people if they're turned to animals because they don't have the same rights as humans. So he actually uses this because he wants to use this new morphing powers for personal gain. He basically tries to, spoilers, like kill off the other animals when they're in animal form, but as punishment they basically force him to stay trapped in the form of a mouse. So he's stuck as a mouse, and they trap him on like a deserted trash island.
Maybe that's what happened to Mr. Big.
Well,
and he's just managed.
Here's the interesting thing. So I haven't read this issue yet, but apparently David comes back as like the returning villain. So he apparently, as a mouse, is able to like go into like stores and banks and steal money since he's undetected. But since he has the intelligence of a mouse,
one bill at a time?
I guess so. But he has the intelligence of a human, so he's able to, I guess, steal things that are very, very expensive, and then basically stockpile a bunch of money, which he actually uses to pay human goons to kind of carry out his dirty work in like a later book. So it's interesting that, and I think we were actually talking about that before we started recording. We were talking a bit about the current state of society and the banking system and stuff. But it seems like real power is not based on size or strength. In our real world, it's based on how much money you have, money to buy people. And that seems to be the case with this minute in Zootopia. That even though Mr. Big is ironically very, very small, he obviously has a lot of power to pay these polar bears to keep them in, I guess, his payroll. So it's interesting.
Sometimes the little guy can get ahead in Zootopia, where anyone can be anything. See, Mr. Big got what he wanted.
Yeah. Well, going back to Mr. Big, I think it's interesting. Not only does he have like that tiny little ring that Nick has to kiss, just imagine all the fox slobber, but he also has a tiny little rose on his lapel, and that's the thing that bugs me. I'm like, how do you get
where
a
would
rose
you find
that
a rose that maybe it's like a bonsai of a rose?
Well, I'm thinking it could be a rose
rodent bonsais.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but he has a tiny little rose. Normally when you have an animal that small in other movies or TV shows, it's for comedic effect. They have like a giant daisy that looks small to us, but it's like it fills up like half their shirt.
Yeah, and in fact, we've seen that kind of thing earlier when we were in Little Rodentia. Big flowers as trees and stuff like that.
Another thing that is also curious is he calls Nick Nicky, which...
Nicky...
Is that an Italian name or a Greek name? Because
I think putting Y at the end of something sounds very Italian-American, you know?
I think that was a joke in, again, we don't know whether it's the original source or a parody of it. I think it's the joke in My Big Fat Greek Wedding or
I
one
love
of the
that
parodies
movie
of
so
that.
much.
Where the guy's like, oh yeah, here's my son Nicky and his son Nicky and cousin Nicky and that's Nicky and Nicky. So I was thinking, oh, that's what it kind of reminded me of when Mr. Big was saying Nicky.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, Nick does kiss that ring very delicately, and Mr. Big responds in that very, Godfather-esque voice. Not that I would know. You come here unannounced on the day my daughter is to be married. Which I presume is probably like a direct line from The Godfather. Like, I would not be surprised. I don't know, but I'm sure it is.
I think, again, we only know this from the references because I've heard that line from like The Simpsons, Family Guy, and South Park references.
Yeah, it must be.
Godfather,
it must be. That's got to be what it is. And so Nick responds, well, actually, we were brought here against our will, so... Point is, I did not know it was your car. I certainly did not know about your daughter's wedding. And at this point, Mr. Big responds with that little nickname, I trusted you, Nicky. I welcome you into my home. At which point, Nick kind of like hangs his head in shame and like folds his hands in a very like respectful kind of way. We broke bread together. Grandmama made you a cannoli. And then we go over to this cool, obviously venerated image of this more elderly shrew on the wall with all this ornate decoration around it. And it's just this portrait of this old lady shrew.
Yeah.
That has a very maternal kind of look, I suppose.
A lot of Italian stereotypes in this scene. So.
Yeah. And then Mr. Big goes on, how did you repay my generosity? With a rug made from the butt of a skunk. A skunk butt rug. You disrespected me. You disrespected my grandmama, who I buried. And that's where the minute ends. Our line is cut off there, but I'm just loving this voice. I want to know who did the voice for that character. Let's look that up. Can we figure that out?
You look it up.
Okay.
In the meantime, I will say that the Patriots did lost. If you guys are following the Super Bowl from our previous minute,
spoilers.
The Patriots lost. And actually, I think we were kind of joking that furries would be fans of the Eagles because they're the only animal mascot in the Super Bowl. And apparently they are. After the Super Bowl was over, I was looking at Twitter, and it seemed like a lot of furry artists were drawing fan art of the Eagles. So,
oh my gosh, guess who? Guess who voiced Mr. Big?
Who voiced Mr. Big?
Maurice LaMarche.
Would I be out of touch if I asked who was that?
Don't worry about it. Okay, here's why it's significant. Maurice LaMarche, so he's well known in a lot of things. He voiced several characters in Futurama, including Hedonism Bot, who's my all-time favorite Futurama character. Right. But also very, very well known for his role in Animaniacs as the Brain in Pinky and the Brain. So that's actually very appropriate that it was a mouse character. Yeah, a mouse character in Pinky and the Brain, and now he's playing a shrew here. That's perfect.
And Pinky and the Brain in Pinky and the Brain is actually a reference to Orson Welles, who's famous for one of the greatest cinematic masterpieces of all time, Citizen Kane. So it's kind of ironic that both of them rodent character he voices have connection to classic cinema.
Yeah, man, I love Maurice LaMarche. I actually met him this past year at Emerald City Comic Con, which is coming up again this year.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Are you going?
There. I am going. It'll be fun. He won't be there this year, but I got to meet him. He signed. Actually, I can see it from where I'm sitting. It's right behind my computer. I have this really cool poster done by one of the storyboard artists for Animaniacs. It has Wacko, Yakko, and Dot, and then also Pinky and the Brain on it with the Space Needle. And I got all of them were there. All of those voice actors were there, and I got them all to sign it. But yeah, he's a really cool guy. He did the Orson Welles bit for me, the Frozen Peas commercial kind of thing. But yeah, that's super cool. I'm so glad that was him in the movie. That's excellent.
All right. I actually know that guy then. That's good.
Yep, you just didn't know the name, but that's okay.
I think I knew the name. I just didn't recognize it off the back. But yeah, so it was a fun minute, and I think hopefully we could get the Godfather minute guys in before this entire scene is over.
Yep.
But since we go through this minute by minute, I think we have a few more chances to try to grab them for a future episode. But you guys will just have to stay tuned for future episodes to see.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So that does it for the minute, but I want to hear some more detail about the con you went to, since now that it's not happening in the future, we can actually know what happened. So how was that?
Well, first off, there's no meteorite that hit the con, so that's good. I did actually meet people who identified with bird characters. I forgot to ask them,
They live among us.
though, whether they wanted to be called fairies or avians. So yeah,
You had one job, Choco.
I did have one job. So again, this is the third time I've vended at this con. It's one of 4 furry cons I've been to. I'm still kind of new to the furry community, but I will say that I laid out a bunch of our business cards, and it seems like a lot of people picked them up. So if you guys are new listeners and you picked up podcasts because of the advertisements I was putting around Furry Fiesta, well, thank you for joining us. We welcome new listeners. I will say that I am still trying to get used to the furry community. They seem to be kind of a 180 of the pony fandom, specifically pony cons. Where
In what way?
So, the joke is with the brony fandom that the bronies, especially at cons, are kind of awkward and antisocial to the point they need like cue cards on their badges to say.
I think you've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Furries are very sociable.
They are very social, and I think I keep on mentioning this every time I come back from a furry con, but it really, really hit me when I walked into the lobby of Furry Fiesta, where I looked around and almost everybody was hugging someone else. It was like I'm sure a lot of these people are old friends. I mean, I'm sure like when we see each other for the first time at a con, we go up and hug each other as well. But I just kind of hit me that almost everyone in eye's reach was hugging another person or hugging a fursuiter or whatnot. So I would say they are a very, very affectionate social community, more so than bronies or comic fans at the other cons I've been to. So
I think
still
that's
something
very fair. Yeah.
It's still something that I'm trying to get used to. I did do some panels at that con. I did my So You Want to Be a Con Artist panel talking about vending at cons. I did a little history of transformation in fiction, which was also fun. I will say though that you, Simul, who actually you run events for Everfree Northwest, don't you?
Yep. Yes, I do.
I will say that for a con that's actually very well organized and put together, they really are lax on their paneling staff. And these are the same guys who also run Nightmare Nights Dallas, and that was also a criticism I had at that con, where I had 3 panels. For all 3 panels, there's no staffer in the room to help get people in and out. There's no staffer to help with adjusting the PowerPoint or getting the PowerPoint set up. And when we need to find staffers to help with the panel setup, there's none in ear's reach. So it's something I think they will need to work on, but on the vending side, it was great. It was nice to meet fans. I'm very happy with the commissions people got from me. I'm very happy to see you guys are liking the podcast. So if you came up to me and talked to me at my table, thanks a lot. And we hope for you new listeners, you continue with us for future minutes.
Awesome. Yeah, glad you had a good time. Okay, so I think that's just about going to do it. One quick thing before we go, because you had posted on Twitter and we had asked people to suggest names for your cute little pet mouse that you had. I showed one of those pictures to my friend and she suggested Gabe as a name.
Well,
Gabe.
you know, it's funny because I was looking at Mr. Big in this minute. He had these really, really fluffy eyebrows, and this mouse also has.
Oh, well, there you go.
Very,
It could be
very
Mr.
similar
Big,
fluff.
too.
Yeah, so I'm like, oh, we could probably tie it in. But Gabe is interesting. I don't know anyone named Gabe in real life, actually, aside from
Gabe
that.
Ben. Gabe Newell. Name
Yeah,
the mouse
aside
Gabe
from
Newell.
him.
Just straight up.
Okay, Gabe. Okay, well, I will consider that for the mouse name. If you guys have suggestions for the mouse, look up the picture on the Zootopia Minute Twitter and tweet at us there.
Yep. Okay, so that is going to do it for this episode of Zootopia Minute. Thank you guys once again so much for listening. If you did enjoy this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's where you can get all of our stuff the soonest. You can also follow us on Twitter at Zootopia Minute, like us on Facebook, and you can send us anything you'd like to our email, zootopiaminute@gmail.com. Just let us know what you thought of previous minutes, any interesting thoughts you have about the podcast in general. We always love to hear from you. So that is going to do it for this episode. I hope you guys have a wonderful week.
And a happy Lunar New Year. Take care. It's the year of the dog. Woof, woof, woof.